After more than 30 years of working with people living with diabetes, especially those over 50, I've noticed something quite interesting. Many people think that to control blood sugar, we only need to focus on sugar or carbohydrates. But in reality, there's another tiny world inside our bodies. A world that many people almost forget about. That world is the gut. Let me ask you to imagine something for a moment. Inside our gut live trillions of bacteria every single day. It might sound a little scary, right? But the truth is, most of them are actually good guys, silent workers that help digest food, regulate the immune system, and even influence blood sugar levels. The problem is, these tiny friends need food to dot, and this is where green bananas come into the story. When you eat a green banana, not the sweet ripe ones you usually see in grocery stores, it contains a special type of starch called resistant starch. The name sounds a bit scientific, but I'll explain it in a very simple way. The starch in white rice or bread is usually digested quickly. It passes through the stomach and small intestine, then rapidly turns into sugar in the bloodstream. But resistant starch in green bananas is different. It's like a very stubborn guest. It passes through the stomach and small intestine without being digested right away. Eventually, it reaches the large intestine, and there it becomes a favorite meal for beneficial bacteria. One of my patients, Robert, 67 years old, from California, once told me something very interesting. He said, "Doctor, I always thought diabetes was about sugar, but it turns out it's also about the bacteria in my gut." And he's not entirely wrong. When these beneficial bacteria are well fed, they start working more effectively. They help reduce silent inflammation in the body, improve digestion, and most importantly, they make the body more sensitive to insulin. You can think of insulin like a key dot. It helps move sugar from the blood into cells to create energy. But in people with type 2 diabetes, that lock is often a bit stuck. When the gut microbiome becomes healthier, it's like that lock gets lubricated again. And the result, blood sugar becomes more stable. The body uses energy more efficiently, and you simply feel better. I'm not saying green bananas are a miracle. There's no such food in the world. But sometimes, very small changes in your diet can create big differences over time. And interestingly, something as simple as a green banana can become part of that journey. So here's a question I want you to ask yourself today. Are we only feeding our bodies, or are we also feeding the beneficial bacteria that quietly keep us healthy every day? In the next part, I'll share something that surprises many people when they first hear it. Why green bananas, even though they are still a type of carbohydrate, can actually help some people with diabetes control their blood sugar better than many other foods. And the answer is truly fascinating. If you found this video meaningful, please take a second to subscribe and share it with others. Every subscription, every like, every share is not just a small click, but a big motivation for me to keep creating more valuable content. There's something many of my patients over 50 with diabetes have told me in the clinic. And I believe you may have experienced it too. It's that sudden feeling of hunger that comes out of nowhere. Not the normal kind of hunger before a meal, but the kind where just a few hours after eating, your stomach starts to growl, you feel a little lightheaded, and your mind keeps saying, maybe I need something to eat. As we move past 50, the body begins to change. Metabolism slows down, insulin becomes less effective. And when we eat fast-digesting carbohydrates, like white bread, white rice, or sugary foods, blood sugar tends to rise quickly, and then drop just as fast. That up and down pattern is like a roller coaster. When blood sugar drops quickly, the body sends a strong signal to the brain, eat something. That's why many people aren't truly hungry, but still feel the urge to snack. And this is where green bananas can play an interesting role. Unlike many other carbohydrates, green bananas contain a relatively high amount of resistant starch. This type of starch is digested more slowly, so the energy from it is released gradually and more steadily. I often explain it to my patients in a very simple way. Imagine burning a piece of paper, flares up quickly and burns out just as fast. But if you burn a small piece of wood, the flame burns slower, steadier, and longer. Some foods act like paper. Green bananas are more like that piece of wood. When energy is released more slowly, you tend to feel full for longer. And this matters more than most people realize, especially for those living with diabetes. Because when hunger is better controlled, something very natural happens. You feel less need to snack. You no longer feel the urge to reach for cookies or snacks in the afternoon and during main meals. You naturally eat fewer carbs, without having to force yourself. Another patient of mine, Daniel, 70 years old, from Arizona, once shared something surprising. He said, "Doctor, I used to need something to eat around 4 p.m. But lately, I realize I don't even think about it anymore." Not because he was trying to diet, simply because his body no longer demanded it. And when that continues over weeks, even months, small changes begin to appear. Weight becomes more stable, belly fat may decrease slightly, and blood sugar becomes easier to manage. You see, sometimes we think managing diabetes is a big battle filled with strict rules. But in reality, it often starts with very small changes in how we eat every day. A simple food choice that helps you stay full a little longer, snack a little less, and gently support weight control over time. It sounds simple, but sometimes, it's these simple things that make the biggest difference. There's something I've seen over and over again while working with patients in their 50s and 60s who have diabetes. It is the fear of fruit. You may have experienced this yourself, or maybe you know someone like this. When first diagnosed with diabetes, many people immediately start removing almost all fruits from their diet. Apples seem too sweet, grapes seem too high in sugar, and bananas feel even more concerning. One of my patients, Margaret, 68 years old, from Florida, once said something I'll never forget. She said, "Doctor, I used to love fruit, but since I got diabetes, it feels like I had to say goodbye to it." I smiled and asked her a very simple question. "Margaret, who told you that all fruits are the same?" You see, in nutrition, just like in life, things are rarely just black and white. Fruit is not the enemy for people with diabetes. What matters more is how we understand fruit and how we eat it. Over the years, I've explained this in a very simple way to my patients. When it comes to fruit and blood sugar, 3 things always matter: the type of fruit, its ripeness, and how we eat it. A fresh apple eaten with breakfast can affect the body very differently than a glass of sweet apple juice on an empty stomach. A ripe yellow banana may raise blood sugar more quickly, while a green banana can have a completely different effect. Sounds surprising, right? But nutrition science has shown this quite clearly. When a banana is still green, most of its starch hasn't yet turned into simple sugars. Instead, it exists as resistant starch, a type of starch that is digested more slowly and causes a smaller spike in blood sugar. But as the banana ripens, what happens? That starch gradually converts into natural sugars. That's why ripe bananas taste much sweeter. I often tell my patients this: it's not the banana that changes, it's what's happening inside it, day by day. One of my patients, Harold, 71 years old, from Oregon, was very surprised to hear this. He said that for years, he avoided bananas completely because he thought they would spike his blood sugar. But once he understood the difference between green and ripe bananas, he realized the issue wasn't the banana itself, but the timing of when he ate it. You see, many fears in nutrition come from oversimplified advice. People say, fruit is sweet, so people with diabetes shouldn't eat it. But the human body is far more complex than that. Sometimes, what we need is not to eliminate a food from our lives, but to understand it a little better. And green bananas are a perfect example of that. They remind us that in nutrition, just like in life, the difference often lies in the smallest details. There's a question I hear quite often in the clinic, especially from patients who have just been diagnosed with diabetes. They usually look at me very seriously and ask, "Doctor, do I have to completely give up carbohydrates from now on?" And every time I hear that question, I pause for a moment before answering. Because the real answer isn't as simple as many people think. You see, our bodies, especially after the age of 50, still need energy to function every day. The heart needs energy to keep beating steadily. Muscles need energy so we can walk, climb stairs, or simply play with our grandchildren. And most of that energy still comes from carbohydrates. So the question isn't, should we eat carbs or not? The real question is, what kind of carbs are we eating? When we cut out too many carbs without replacing them with proper energy sources, the body starts to feel like a car running low on fuel. That's when we need to think in a different way. Instead of simply removing carbs, sometimes a better solution is choosing smarter carbs. And this is where green bananas can be an interesting example. Green bananas are still carbohydrates, yes, but the type of starch they contain works a bit differently from what we usually eat every day. The carbs in white rice or bread are typically digested quickly. After eating, they rapidly turn into glucose and enter the bloodstream. Why many people see their blood sugar rise quickly after meals. Green bananas are a bit different because they contain more resistant starch. Their energy is released more slowly and steadily. This means instead of a sudden wave of sugar rushing into the bloodstream, the body receives energy in a gradual and gentle way. I often explain this to my patients, using a simple image. Imagine pouring water into a small lake. If you turn the faucet on full blast, the water rushes in quickly, and the lake may overflow. But if the water flows slowly and steadily, the lake still fills up, but without overflowing. Our blood sugar works in a similar way. Some of my patients have tried replacing a small portion of carbs in their meals with green bananas, not all of it, just a small part. For example, replacing a portion of white rice at lunch. After a few weeks, what they noticed wasn't a dramatic change, but something much more subtle. Their post-meal blood sugar didn't spike as much, their bodies felt more stable, and their energy throughout the day felt more consistent. You see, when it comes to managing diabetes, the most effective changes are not always the most extreme ones. Often, they are just small adjustments in how we choose our foods every day. Instead of seeing carbohydrates as the enemy, we begin to learn how to choose ones that are more friendly to our bodies. And among those choices, green bananas, a simple, familiar food, can sometimes offer a completely new perspective on how we build our meals. Many of them are far too strict with themselves. Right after being diagnosed with diabetes, they change their diet almost immediately. They drastically cut back on rice. Bread is almost completely eliminated. Potatoes, corn, noodles. Many people are afraid to even touch them anymore in their minds. There's one very clear thought. The fewer carbs I eat, the better my blood sugar will be. It sounds reasonable at first, doesn't it? But in reality, things are sometimes different. When we cut too many carbohydrates without truly understanding what our body needs, we may end up lacking energy. And the signs are quite clear. Feeling more tired, reduced strength, sometimes even lightheadedness or dizziness. Especially in older adults. Think of your body like a car. If you drive without putting in enough fuel, the car doesn't run better, it just runs weaker. Our bodies work the same way. Carbohydrates, when chosen wisely and eaten properly, are still an important source of energy. For people with diabetes, the goal is not to completely eliminate carbs, but to understand and choose them more wisely. In modern medicine, we increasingly focus on the quality of food rather than just the quantity. In other words, it's not just about how much you eat, but what you eat. An overly strict diet can sometimes make life feel heavy. People feel anxious every time they look at a meal, and in my experience, that doesn't lead to sustainable diabetes control. Managing diabetes is truly a long journey. It's not a sprint that lasts a few weeks or months. It's more like a long walk, and on that journey, our bodies need enough energy to keep moving forward. So instead of forcing yourself into extreme diets, a wiser approach is to learn how to eat the right foods, with understanding, and by listening to your body. Sometimes, it's simply about changing the type of carbs you choose, rather than eliminating them entirely. That's the approach I always encourage my patients to follow. One that is gentler, more practical, and most importantly, sustainable over time. Many people think the biggest issue with diabetes is just blood sugar, but in reality, the story goes a bit deeper. Sometimes, what we need to pay attention to is not only sugar, but also the fat quietly accumulating inside the body. Have you ever heard of visceral fat? This isn't the kind of fat you can clearly see in the mirror. It's not the fat under your skin that you can touch around your belly or hips. Visceral fat lies deeper, surrounding organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines. And importantly, many nutrition studies in recent years have shown that visceral fat is closely linked to insulin resistance. As this fat increases, the body responds less effectively to insulin, making blood sugar harder to control. I once had a patient, Linda, 62 years old. She wasn't overweight, in fact. She looked quite slim on the outside. But when we looked deeper, we found a significant amount of visceral fat around her abdomen. That explained why her blood sugar kept fluctuating even though she was very careful with her diet. That's when we began talking more about the quality of carbohydrates in her meals. Some foods rich in resistant starch, like green bananas, have a very interesting property. When they enter the digestive system, they are not absorbed immediately like many other carbohydrates. Instead, they act more like a special type of fiber, supporting the gut microbiome and helping energy metabolism stay more stable. Some studies suggest that diets higher in resistant starch may help improve metabolism and reduce visceral fat over time. Of course, I always remind my patients that no single food is a miracle. Grain bananas are not medicine. But when they become part of a balanced diet, along with gentle physical activity, good sleep, and portion control. They can quietly support the body. Think of your body like a garden. Every food choice you make each day is like planting a small seed in that garden. Seeds help the garden grow healthier over time, not overnight, but little by little, day after day. And sometimes, very simple foods, like a green banana, can be one of those seeds. Not loud, not instantly magical, but when we understand and use them properly, they can become part of a bigger picture in caring for our health and managing diabetes as we move into our 50s, 60s, and beyond. Now, I'd like to share a very small detail, but an important one. In nutrition, sometimes how we prepare food matters just as much as the food itself. Green bananas are a perfect example. When people hear that green bananas may help with blood sugar control, they often ask me, "Doctor, does that mean I just need to eat green bananas?" And I usually smile and say, not exactly. How you prepare them matters too. You see, green bananas contain a special type of starch called resistant starch. This is what makes them interesting for people trying to manage their blood sugar. But what many people don't realize is that the amount of resistant starch can change depending on how the food is prepared. In practice, the simplest method I often recommend is to boil green bananas before eating them. This makes them easier to digest, especially for older adults. But the next step is where things get interesting. After boiling, if you let the bananas cool completely, or even refrigerate them for a few hours before eating, a natural process takes place in the starch structure. Scientists call this process starch retrogradation. In simple terms, when the bananas cool down, part of the starch becomes harder for the body to digest, which increases the amount of resistant starch naturally. I often explain this with a simple everyday image. Starch as tiny strands. When food is hot, those strands are loose, so the body can easily break them down into sugar. But when the food cools, some of those strands tighten and stick together. As a result, the body digests them more slowly, and blood sugar rises more gently. One of my patients told me, after trying this for a few weeks, "Doctor, this is fascinating. I didn't think such a small change in how I eat could make a difference." And that's exactly what I always try to emphasize when talking about nutrition. For people in their 50s and beyond, health doesn't always come from big or complicated changes. Sometimes, it comes from very small details in daily habits, a slightly different way of cooking, a slightly smarter food choice, a slightly deeper understanding of your own body. And over time, those small changes can make a very big difference in your health. Before we wrap up this section, there's something very important that I always repeat to my patients. And today, I'd like to share it with you as well. Green bananas can be an interesting food. They have beneficial nutritional properties, especially for people trying to manage blood sugar after the age of 50. But I want you to remember one thing very clearly. Green bananas are not a cure for diabetes. Over more than 30 years of working with patients with diabetes, I've seen many nutrition trends come and go. From time to time, a certain food gets praised as a miracle solution. Some people say it's cinnamon. Others say apple cider vinegar. And some believe in a certain tea or a specific type of seed. But medicine always comes back to a very simple truth. There is no single food that can cure diabetes. Managing diabetes is really a bigger picture, made up of many different pieces. Food is just one part of that picture. Green bananas, when prepared and eaten properly, can be a small part of that picture, but they cannot replace other important factors. For example, taking medication exactly as prescribed by your doctor. Some people, after seeing a slight improvement in blood sugar from diet changes, think they can reduce their medication on their own. That can sometimes lead to unnecessary risks. Or daily physical activity. Even a gentle 20 to 30-minute walk can help your muscles use glucose much more effectively. And another thing I always encourage my patients to do is to check their blood sugar regularly. Numbers are like a compass, helping us understand whether we're on the right path or need to make adjustments. You see, taking care of your health after 50 is not about searching for a miracle. It's more like tending to a garden. You water it, you nourish it, you remove the weeds, little by little, day after day. Green bananas can be a good small seed in that garden. But for the garden to truly thrive, many other elements need to work together. And when all those elements come together, a balanced diet, regular movement, proper medication, and consistent health monitoring, that's the sustainable path to living well with diabetes. Before you start adding green bananas to your meals, there's a small but important point we should talk about honestly. In nutrition, especially for people over 50, healthy doesn't always mean the more, the better. Resistant starch, the special type of starch found in green bananas, behaves a little differently in the body compared to regular starch. Part of it travels to the large intestine and becomes food for the gut microbiome. And in most cases, that's a good thing for your health. But if your body isn't used to it and you suddenly consume too much at once, your digestive system may respond in ways that feel uncomfortable, such as bloating, gas, or mild indigestion. That's why I often advise my patients to start slowly. Think of your digestive system like an old friend. If you want to change that friend's habits, you can't rush the process. You need to give your body time to adjust. So for beginners, a small amount is usually the wiser choice. About half to 1 green banana per serving is enough to let your body get used to it. After some time, as your digestive system adapts, you can gradually adjust the amount if needed. One thing I always remind my patients is this: listen to your body. Our bodies are incredibly smart. They always send signals when something works well, or when we're pushing a little too far. In your 50s, 60s, and beyond, taking care of your health is not about forcing your body to follow rigid rules. It's about learning how to work with your body. Eat a little more slowly. Pay attention to how your body responds. Make small adjustments along the way. And when we approach things gently like this, the body often responds with what we all hope for: balance and a lasting sense of well-being. Before we wrap up today's conversation, I'd like to share something very important, something we often emphasize in medicine, but that people sometimes forget on the internet. That is, no single food works for everyone. Green bananas may offer certain benefits for many people trying to manage their blood sugar, but that doesn't mean they are suitable for every body or every health condition. In my clinic, every patient is a different story. Some people are in their 60s and still very healthy. Others are just in their early 50s but already dealing with multiple complex conditions. That's why when it comes to nutrition, I always remind my patients, look at your own body, not just general advice. For example, for people with advanced kidney disease, food choices need to be considered very carefully at that point. The kidneys are like a weakened filtration system, and even seemingly normal foods can become a burden. Or for those dealing with severe constipation, green bananas, especially if not prepared properly, may sometimes slow digestion further and prolong discomfort. I once had a patient, around 58 years old, who was going through an acute stomach ulcer. When the digestive system is already irritated like that, introducing a new food, even a healthy one, needs to be done with great caution. You see, taking care of your health is not about applying the same formula to everyone. It's more like tailoring a piece of clothing. What looks great on one person may not fit someone else. So if you fall into a group with kidney issues, stomach conditions, or a sensitive digestive system, the wisest step is to talk with your doctor before making dietary changes. A short conversation with your doctor can sometimes save you from many problems later on. And that's exactly what I hope for when sharing information like this. Not to claim that any one food is miraculous, but to help you understand your body better, make wiser choices, and care for your health in a way that is safe, sustainable, and truly right for you. Because in your 50s, 60s, and beyond, the most valuable goal is not just living longer, it's living well, living with ease, and enjoying each day with a body you understand and appreciate.